Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy History Channel. Tonight, we'll wander through the long and winding path of military history, a story that reaches back thousands of years to the very first sharpened stones, and stretches forward into space, new technologies, and beyond. It is a history carried on the clash of swords and the thunder of cannons, but also in the small human details that are often forgotten. The steady beat of a drum guiding soldiers through the dust, the flutter of a banner held high in the smoke, and the quiet bond between comrades waiting before battle. Military history is not only about weapons and tactics. It is about innovation born out of necessity, about cultures leaving their mark on one another, and about the way conflict has shaped the story of humanity. If you enjoy these gentle journeys, I invite you to like and subscribe, or simply share a thought in the comments below. It helps others find their way here too, one sleepy soul at a time. But for now, all you need to do is rest. Get comfortable and allow the weight of the day to drift away as we begin our journey into the echoes and innovations of war through the centuries. Let's begin. Obsidian blades were sharper than modern surgical steel. Long before steel swords or rifles, people discovered that volcanic glass, obsidian, could be broken into blades so sharp that their edges approached molecular thinness. In Mesoamerica, Aztec warriors wielded macuahuitl, wooden clubs embedded with rows of obsidian teeth, capable of slicing through skin, muscle, and even bone with frightening precision. These shimmering black blades were not only practical, but deeply symbolic, often associated with fire and the Earth's violent birthplaces. Archaeologists have found that even today, a freshly knapped obsidian edge can rival or surpass modern surgical steel in sharpness, leaving cuts so fine they heal with less scarring. For ancient warriors, such weapons must have felt both powerful and mystical, forged not in a smith's fire, but gifted directly from volcanoes. On battlefields, obsidian glinted like captured night, silent yet devastating, a reminder that sometimes the oldest tools remain among the most extraordinary. Drums and flutes once directed whole armies. In ancient and medieval battles, the chaos of combat made spoken orders nearly impossible to hear. Across dust, smoke, and the roar of thousands of voices, commanders turned to sound itself as their language. Drums, flutes, horns, and even gongs carried signals that entire armies learned to recognize. A roll of the drum could mean advance a sudden silence, hold position. In China, flukes cut through the noise with piercing clarity, while Ottoman Janissary bands shook the ground with kettle drums, cymbals, and trumpets that guided soldiers as much as they unnerved the enemy. The rhythm kept formations moving in unison, transforming scattered men into a single, flowing machine. Even today, echoes of this practice remain in military bands and marching cadence, less for combat now, but still carrying that ancient idea that music and rhythm could command thousands of human beings across the Balamar. Storm of battle. Chariots turned archers into ancient cavalry. Before cavalry became the dominant force on battlefields, the invention of the war chariot changed everything. Light, fast, and maneuverable, these two-wheeled platforms allowed warriors to shoot arrows or hurl spears while racing across open plains. Ancient Egyptians perfected the design with spoked wheels and teams of horses, turning their armies into swift-moving storms of arrows. To face such an onslaught was terrifying. Enemies would see dust rising on the horizon, then feel a rain of shafts before the chariots wheeled away. Unlike lumbering siege engines, these vehicles struck quickly and vanished, only to return from another angle. For archers, the chariot was a revolution. No longer bound to foot speed, they became hunters on wheels. In art, pharaohs are often shown standing tall on chariots, bow drawn, a symbol not only of military might, but of divine control over speed, direction, and destruction. Spartan shields were more important than swords. For Spartans, the shield was the heart of their identity as warriors. Unlike swords or spears, which served the individual, the shield was seen as protection for the man beside you. Ancient sayings held that a Spartan soldier who lost his spear or sword might be forgiven, but losing his shield brought shame, because it meant he had endangered the phalanx, the tight-knit wall of overlapping shields that defined their strength. Each shield was large, round, and heavy, painted with symbols of unity, such as the Greek letter lambda. In formation, these shields locked together, transforming many men into one impenetrable body. For Spartans, discipline was survival. A single broken shield wall could spell disaster. To march into battle with one's shield was to carry not just wood and bronze, but the weight of loyalty, of trust, and of the understanding that survival depended on collective strength. Roman legions built roads as they marched. The Roman legions were more than soldiers. They were also engineers. As they advanced across Europe, North Africa, and the Near East, they carried with them not only weapons, but picks, shovels, and surveying tools. Wherever they went, they carved roads out of wilderness, laying stone foundations that could withstand centuries of use. These roads allowed supplies, reinforcements, and messages to move swiftly, ensuring Rome's dominance. Soldiers often marched with astounding discipline, up to 20 miles in a day, then stopped to construct a fortified camp, complete with walls, ditches, and watchtowers. The infrastructure they left behind connected towns and markets long after battles ended, shaping the very map of Europe. Some Roman roads still exist, straight as an arrow, their stones worn by centuries of feet, hooves, and wheels. For the legions, every mile built was both conquest and permanence. War, leaving behind civilization itself. War elephants could panic horses instantly. To see an elephant on the battlefield must have been a sight of awe and terror. Towering above men and horses alike, armored elephants carried warriors and archers in wooden towers strapped to their backs. Their sheer size and strength could crush ranks, uproot defenses, and scatter cavalry. For horses, the smell and sound of elephants was utterly alien. Many war horses bolted or froze, panicked at the trumpeting and thunder of giant feet. In India, elephants had long been used in warfare, and the practice spread across Asia and into the armies of Alexander the Great and Carthage's Hannibal. Yet elephants were unpredictable allies. If wounded or frightened, they could turn back into their own lines, causing chaos. Still, no other creature embodied the drama of ancient battle like the war elephant, both a living weapon and a moving symbol of overwhelming, almost mythic power. Chinese crossbows' standardized mass-ranged fire. In ancient China, the crossbow transformed warfare. Unlike ordinary bows, which required years of practice to master, crossbows allowed relatively untrained soldiers to unleash deadly force with mechanical precision. A simple squeeze could drive a bolt through armor, giving vast armies the power of ranged fire without relying solely on elite archers. By the Warring States period, crossbows were standardized, with interchangeable bronze trigger mechanisms, meaning repairs and replacements could be made quickly in the field. This level of organization allowed Chinese generals to field enormous formations of crossbowmen who could unleash volleys in unison. The sound must have been overwhelming, a crackling storm of strings, followed by the hiss of hundreds of bolts. It was a technology so advanced that it remained a military staple for centuries, long after its invention, reminding us how ingenuity in design could shift the balance of entire civilizations. The Mongols mastered horseback archery at full gallop. The Mongol armies of the 13th century were feared across continents, not because of heavy armor or massive fortresses, but because of their unmatched mobility. Mongol warriors could ride for days, living on horseback, and fire arrows accurately even while galloping at full speed. Their composite bows, crafted of horn, wood, and sinew, were powerful enough to pierce armor, yet small enough to handle while mounted. Tactics often involved feigned retreats. Riders would turn in their saddles, loosing arrows backward as they appeared to flee, luring enemies into traps. Entire kingdoms fell before the whirlwind of these tactics as Mongols swept from the steppes into Persia, Russia, and beyond. To face them was to face an enemy who seemed to move with the wind, invisible one moment, then striking from every direction the next. Horse and rider became one, a terrifying fusion of speed and precision. Viking longships let raids strike deep inland. The sleek, elegant design of Viking longships made them one of history's most effective tools of war. Built with overlapping planks and shallow drafts, they could glide across open seas yet also slip into narrow rivers. This meant that Viking raiders were not limited to coastal attacks. They could appear deep inland, striking towns and monasteries far from the shore. The sight of carved dragon prows rising from the mist must have been chilling to behold. Yet these ships were more than raiding craft. They were symbols of status, of identity, and of exploration. Longships carried warriors across the North Sea, to the British Isles, France, and even into the Mediterranean. Some went further still, reaching Iceland, Greenland, and North America. For the Vikings, the longship was both battlefield and lifeline, a vessel that turned the world itself into a frontier for conquest. Samurai armor was designed to flex and flow. Unlike the heavy plate armor of European knights, Japanese samurai armor was built with flexibility in mind. It was crafted from hundreds of small, lacquered plates laced together with silk cords. This created a protective shell that could deflect arrows and blades, while still allowing a warrior to move with speed and agility. The armor shimmered with color, the lacing forming patterns that were both practical and beautiful. Helmets often bore crests shaped like horns, moons, or waves, turning warriors into living symbols of power. Unlike rigid steel suits, samurai armor could bend and flow, suited for battles that relied on quick sword strikes, archery, and mounted combat. It was not only protection but also an art form, armor that spoke of heritage, honor, and identity. In battle, the samurai's armor carried both function and poetry into the fray. Greek fire could burn, even on water. In the Byzantine Empire, a terrifying weapon earned a reputation so fierce that its exact recipe became one of history's most carefully guarded secrets. Known as Greek fire, it was a flammable liquid launched from bronze siphons aboard ships, sticking to surfaces and burning even on water. Imagine being a sailor watching flames spread across the waves toward your vessel, a sight that seemed supernatural. Accounts describe entire fleets set ablaze, their crews helpless against the roaring, unquenchable fire. Some say it hissed like serpents, exploding when it touched wood, sails, or flesh. Historians still debate its ingredients. Possibilities include petroleum, sulfur, resin, or quicklime, but no one knows for certain. The Byzantines used Greek fire sparingly, saving it for crucial battles. To enemies, it seemed like divine punishment, a weapon that turned the sea itself into fire. Even centuries later, its legend smolders. Medieval castles had murder holes for defense. To defend against attackers storming a castle gate, medieval architects devised grimly effective features. Among them were murder holes, openings in the ceilings of gate passages. From above, defenders could drop rocks, boiling water, heated sand, or even quicklime on those trying to force their way in. Hot sand was particularly cruel. searing through armor and finding its way into eyes and joints. Imagine charging through a dark stone passage, only to be showered with burning grit that clung to you, choking and blinding. Murder holes were not always lethal. Sometimes defenders dropped harmless objects to frighten and scatter attackers, buying precious time. These hidden apertures remind us that castles were not only symbols of power, but machines of defense, carefully designed to funnel and weaken enemies before they could ever reach the inner keep. Every stone held strategy, and every dark ceiling might hide a deadly surprise. The longbow could pierce plate armor. In medieval England, the longbow became a weapon of national identity. Over 6 feet tall, often as tall as its wielder, the longbow could send arrows hurtling with tremendous force. At battles like Agincourt, English archers unleashed storms of arrows that fell like deadly rain. Their shafts, tipped with bodkin points, were designed to pierce even plate armor, turning knights from seemingly invincible champions into vulnerable targets. Archery practice was mandatory for Englishmen, ensuring vast numbers of skilled bowmen were always ready. Firing a longbow required immense strength. The draw weight could exceed 100 pounds, warping the bones of archers who trained from childhood. On battlefields, their volleys darkened the sky, sowing fear before a single sword was drawn. The longbow proved that disciplined, ranged soldiers could topple the armored elite, reshaping warfare and heralding the decline of the knight's dominance. Knights once fought entirely on foot. The image of knights charging on horseback dominates popular memory, but early medieval knights often fought on foot. Before cavalry tactics became widespread, heavily armored warriors stood shoulder to shoulder in shield walls, wielding swords, axes, and spears. Even later, when mounted combat grew prestigious, knights dismounted in certain battles to reinforce infantry lines. At sieges, horses were useless. Stone walls demanded close combat. Knights adapted, leading assaults up ladders, hacking through gates, or defending breaches. Some even preferred fighting on foot, where they could anchor themselves in formations without risking a panicked steed. To fight dismounted required endurance, armor was heavy, and the press of battle exhausting. Yet it also reflected the knight's versatility, warrior, rider, and leader all in one. While the knight astride a warhorse became iconic, the reality was often grittier, fought step by step in the mud and crush of infantry combat. Gunpowder first changed siege warfare in China. Long before European cannons shattered castle walls, China had already unlocked the explosive potential of gunpowder. Invented during the Tang dynasty, it first appeared in fireworks and alchemical experiments. But by the Song dynasty, it had found its way onto battlefields. Soldiers used fire lances, bamboo or metal tubes that blasted flames and projectiles toward enemies. Soon came bombs, grenades, and rockets hurled from primitive launchers. The effect on sieges was profound. No longer could stone walls alone guarantee safety. Defenders faced explosions that shattered gates and rained fire inside. Gunpowder spread slowly westward along trade routes, eventually transforming warfare across the world. But its earliest sparks belonged to Chinese ingenuity, where alchemists seeking immortality accidentally gave humanity one of its most destructive innovations. In their hands, gunpowder was both wonder and terror, a new element that forever altered the balance between defense and attack. Cannons collapsed the age of castles. For centuries, castles stood as near impenetrable fortresses. Their thick stone walls defied arrows, ladders, and even siege towers. But with the arrival of cannons in Europe, their dominance began to crumble. Early cannons were crude, prone to misfires, yet their sheer power was undeniable. Massive stone balls or iron shot could shatter walls that had stood for generations. By the 15th century, sieges were transformed. At Constantinople in 1453, the Ottomans rolled out enormous bombards, some requiring hundreds of men and oxen to move. Their thunderous blasts tore open bridges that no defenders could hold. Suddenly, high vertical walls became a liability, vulnerable to repeated pounding. Architects adapted, designing star-shaped fortresses with sloping walls to deflect cannon fire. But the age of medieval castles, with their towering keeps and crenellations, was over. Gunpowder artillery had rewritten the rules of power, stone yielding to iron and fire. The Janissaries were children taken and trained as soldiers. In the Ottoman Empire, a unique corps of soldiers called the Janissaries rose to immense power. Many of them began life as Christian boys, taken from conquered territories under the Devshirme system. Torn from their families, they were converted, trained, and molded into elite warriors loyal only to the Sultan. From a young age, they learned discipline, weaponry, and strategy, living under strict codes that forbade marriage and personal wealth. Over time, the Janissaries became one of the most feared military units in the world, their distinctive white felt hats marking them in battle. They were also among the first to adopt firearms on a large scale, making them both traditional guardians and modern innovators. Though their origins were harsh, the Janissaries wielded immense influence, shaping Ottoman politics as much as warfare. Their legacy is a reminder of how armies could be forged from both coercion and loyalty. Swiss pikemen could break charging cavalry. In late medieval Europe, heavily armored knights on horseback once ruled battlefields. But Swiss pikemen changed that balance. Armed with long pikes, often over 16 feet, and drilled to stand in dense squares, they formed bristling walls of steel that no horse would willingly charge. When knights thundered forward, their lances shattered against a forest of pikes, while the riders were skewered before reaching the infantry. Swiss mercenaries became sought after across Europe, renowned for their discipline and ferocity. Their tactics emphasized unity, trust, and training, proving that ordinary men working together could withstand the might of nobility. The rise of pikemen helped end the dominance of mounted aristocrats, paving the way for modern infantry armies. It was a moment when balance shifted, when rows of common soldiers, holding steady, showed that even the most glorious cavalry could break against human determination and sharpened wood. War horses were trained not to fear blood. The great destriers of medieval knights were not ordinary horses. These animals were bred and trained for battle, accustomed to chaos that would terrify most creatures. Trainers exposed them to the clash of weapons, the blare of horns, and the sight and smell of blood. A warhorse had to charge forward even as arrows fell and men screamed. They learned to trample enemies, to bite, and to kick when needed. Some accounts describe horses armored alongside their riders, gleaming with barding of leather or steel. To sit astride such a creature was to become part of a living weapon, rider and horse, a single force. War horses were prized possessions, often worth more than the knight's armor itself. Their training reflected the brutal reality of combat. Survival required not only courage in men, but steadfastness in beasts who shared the burden of war. Native American warriors could fire while hanging off horses. Among the many ingenious tactics of Native American warriors, one of the most striking was their use of the horse as both shield and platform. Riders could lean to the side, even hanging completely off the saddle, using the body of the horse to protect themselves while firing arrows or later rifles. This maneuver, requiring immense balance and skill, allowed warriors to appear and vanish in an instant, unleashing volleys while remaining difficult targets. Horses, introduced by Europeans, became deeply integrated into native cultures, transforming mobility, hunting, and warfare. Tribes of the Great Plains became especially renowned for their mastery, turning open landscapes into domains of lightning-fast raids. To see a warrior gallop past, seemingly defying gravity, arrows flying while the rider clung sideways, must have been astonishing. It was a vivid reminder that warfare is not only about weapons, but the creativity of those who wield them. Pirates used grapeshot to shred decks. Pirates, notorious for their daring sea battles, often relied on fearsome weapons designed not to sink ships, but to disable crews. One of their favorites was grapeshot, clusters of small iron balls packed into a canvas bag or metal casing, fired from a cannon. When unleashed, the shot spread like a giant shotgun blast, ripping through sails, rigging, and flesh. Pirates aimed for enemy decks, intending to clear defenders so boarding parties could swarm aboard. The effect was devastating at close range, shredding wood and bodies alike. Unlike solid cannonballs, which could punch through hulls, grapeshot maximized chaos among people. Combined with smoke, noise, and shouted oaths, it turned naval combat into a storm of terror. Grapeshot epitomized the pirates' brutal pragmatism. Ships were prizes to be captured, not sunk. Better to terrify and overwhelm than destroy, leaving both treasure and vessel intact for the victors. The Spanish tercios mixed pike and shot. During the 16th century, Spain developed one of the most formidable military formations of its age, the tercio. These units combined pikemen who formed a protective hedge against cavalry, with soldiers armed with arquebuses or muskets who delivered volleys of gunfire. The blend of pike and shot created a flexible force that dominated European battlefields for more than a century. Tercios were renowned for their discipline, holding firm even under heavy fire. On the field, they resembled bristling squares of men, pikes jutting outward like a porcupine's quills, while gunners stepped forward to fire in waves. This system countered both mounted knights and traditional infantry, reflecting the transition from medieval to early modern warfare. The tercio symbolized Spain's global power at the time, an army that blended old and new, steel and gunpowder, unity and innovation, a formation that carried empire on its disciplined shoulders. Musketeers needed minutes to reload. Early muskets were powerful but painfully slow to use. A soldier had to pour gunpowder down the barrel, ram a lead ball with a rod, prime the pan with powder, and only then fire. In the heat of battle, this process could take 2 or 3 minutes. Against charging enemies, that delay was terrifying. To compensate, armies arranged musketeers in ranks, with one line firing while the others reloaded. The rolling volleys created a near-constant curtain of fire, despite each weapon's slowness. Musketeers were vulnerable during reloads, often relying on pikemen for protection. Clouds of smoke filled the air, stinging eyes and choking lungs, making visibility poor. Yet when muskets fired together, the noise was deafening and morale-shattering. The slow reload times remind us that technology does not advance in neat leaps. It stumbles, balances, and innovates through necessity, every weakness reshaping how wars were fought. Flintlocks finally made firearms practical. The invention of the flintlock in the 17th century transformed firearms into truly practical weapons. Instead of fiddly match cords or unreliable wheel locks, the flintlock used a simple mechanism, a shard of flint striking steel to create sparks, igniting priming powder. This system was quicker, more reliable, and easier to use in rain or wind. Soldiers could now fire faster, reload with greater confidence, and trust their weapons not to fail in critical moments. Flintlocks spread rapidly, arming infantry, cavalry, and even pirates across the seas. They also standardized bayonet use, turning every musket into a dual-purpose weapon. For over 2 centuries, Flintlocks dominated warfare, from European conflicts to colonial battles across the globe. Their simplicity made them powerful, their reliability gave soldiers confidence, and their presence reshaped tactics. The age of the flintlock was an age where the gun truly became king. Bayonet turned guns into spears. The bayonet was a simple invention with profound impact. By attaching a blade to the muzzle of a musket, soldiers transformed a firearm into a spear, eliminating the vulnerability that came while reloading. Early plug bayonets fitted directly into the barrel, preventing firing, but later socket designs allowed both shooting and stabbing. This combination meant infantry could defend themselves against cavalry without relying on pikemen, streamlining armies into more flexible units. The sight of ranks of musketeers lowering bayonets in unison must have been terrifying, a gleaming wall of steel bristling outward. Bayonet charges became iconic, both feared and celebrated, symbols of courage and momentum. They were often as much about morale as physical destruction. Few soldiers could withstand the psychological shock of such a charge. With bayonets, guns became not only ranged weapons but instruments of close combat, bridging the gap between firepower and cold steel. Naval ships once carried hundreds of cannons. In the age of sail, great warships bristled with firepower. Ships of the line, towering wooden giants, often carried over 100 cannons arranged in multiple decks. Broadsides unleashed staggering walls of iron, shaking the sea with thunder. Naval battles became orchestrated duels of maneuver and firepower, where ships lined up to exchange devastating volleys. Life aboard such vessels was cramped and dangerous. Cannons recoiled violently, requiring teams of men to reload them amid choking smoke and flying splinters. Battles were deafening, chaotic, and brutal, yet discipline held crews together. These floating fortresses projected national power across oceans, allowing empires to rise and fall on the strength of their navies. To see one under full sail, flags flying, decks alive with gunners, must have been both magnificent and terrifying. Wooden hulls, canthus sails, and iron shot. Together they ruled the seas for centuries. Signal flags could control entire fleets. Before radios, fleets relied on flags to communicate across the open sea. Commanders devised complex systems where colored banners, hoisted in specific patterns, carried precise orders. With a few flag changes, an admiral could direct dozens of ships to turn, advance, or fire in unison. At battles like Trafalgar, entire naval strategies unfolded through fluttering signals against the sky. Crews had to be vigilant, watching masts constantly for commands. In storms or smoke, visibility failed, leading to confusion and chaos. Yet when it worked, the system transformed scattered vessels into coordinated machines of war. Flags gave admirals a voice across miles of ocean, ensuring that fleets could act as one body despite wind, waves, and noise. Today, signal flags still survive in ceremonial use, reminders of an era when color and cloth carried the weight of entire battles on their threads. The ironclad warship changed everything. When the American Civil War introduced ironclad ships, naval warfare entered a new age. Wooden warships, once dominant, suddenly seemed obsolete. Vessels like the USS Monitor and the CSS Virginia were armored with iron plates that resisted cannon fire, making them nearly invulnerable to traditional broadsides. Their duel at Hampton Roads in 1862 showed the world that the old wooden fleets were finished. The ironclads looked strange, low in the water, smoke pouring from their funnels. But their impact was undeniable. Nations raced to build armored fleets, triggering a global naval revolution. For centuries, sailors had trusted in wood and sail. Now iron and steam ruled the seas. The ironclad was a symbol of industrial might, proof that technology could overturn centuries of tradition almost overnight. The sea itself became a testing ground for the future, where iron walls met iron will. Submarines first terrified sailors in the 19th century. The idea of a warship hidden beneath the waves seemed fantastical for centuries, but by the 19th century, it became a reality. Early submarines, crude and experimental, could sneak beneath enemy ships and strike unseen. The American Civil War saw the Confederate submarine Hunley sink a Union vessel, the first successful underwater attack in history. For sailors on the surface, the thought of an invisible enemy lurking below was horrifying. Submarines changed the psychology of naval warfare. Nowhere felt safe, even in calm harbors. These early craft were dangerous to their own crews as well, with limited air and unreliable engines. Yet the potential was too great to ignore. By the turn of the century, navies embraced submarines as essential weapons, silent hunters that would dominate the oceans in the wars to come. The age of undersea warfare had begun, reshaping the meaning of naval power forever. The Gatling gun could fire continuously with cranks. Before automatic weapons, the Gatling gun stood as a marvel of engineering. Invented in the 1860s by Richard Gatling, it featured multiple rotating barrels, turned by a hand crank that allowed continuous fire. Unlike muskets, which took minutes to reload, the Gatling gun could unleash hundreds of rounds per minute. Its devastating output shocked opponents, mowing down advancing troops with relentless precision. Though heavy and cumbersome, it symbolized a shift toward mechanized killing, where human muscle powered machines of destruction. Armies quickly adopted them for defense against charges, where they proved nearly unstoppable. The Gatling gun's rotating barrels reduced overheating, making it more reliable than earlier repeating weapons. It bridged the gap between manual firearms and the fully automatic machine guns of the 20th century. The whirring of its crank heralded a new era, where speed and volume of fire could decide battles almost instantly. Balloons once served as battlefield observation towers. In the 19th century, long before drones or satellites, armies discovered that the sky could offer a new vantage point. Hot air balloons, tethered to the ground by ropes, lifted observers above the battlefield. From that height, officers could see enemy troop movements, relay artillery adjustments, and spot hidden positions invisible from the ground. During the American Civil War, the Union Army used balloons equipped with telegraphs to send messages down the line, creating an early form of aerial reconnaissance. Soldiers on the ground looked up in awe and unease, for balloons turned the very air into a watchtower. Vulnerable to weather and enemy fire, they were limited, yet their impact was profound. These fragile, floating sentinels foreshadowed the future, when the sky itself would become the battlefield's most decisive dimension, and height would forever mean advantage. Cavalry charges lasted into the 20th century. Though firearms dominated by the late 19th century, the thunder of cavalry charges did not vanish overnight. Horses still carried soldiers into battle well into the 20th century, their hooves pounding against machine guns and barbed wire. In the early months of the First World War, cavalry units galloped across open fields, sabers drawn, only to meet devastating rifle and artillery fire. Yet mounted troops remained useful for scouting, raiding, and moving supplies in rugged terrain. Even in the Second World War, Polish cavalry famously fought, though not against tanks as legend claims, but against infantry with surprising effectiveness. Horses endured where machines faltered, crossing mountains and forests where trucks could not. The persistence of cavalry into modern times reveals both the resilience of tradition and the adaptability of warriors who refused to abandon one of humanity's oldest companions in war, the horse. Machine guns created no man's land in the Great War. The First World War introduced an invention that reshaped the very geography of battle: the machine gun. Capable of firing hundreds of rounds per minute, it transformed open fields into killing grounds. Soldiers dug deep trenches for protection, leaving vast barren zones of mud and barbed wire between opposing sides. These wastelands became known as no man's land, deadly stretches where any movement was instantly cut down. The endless rattling of machine gun fire echoed across Europe, creating stalemates that lasted months. Courage alone could not overcome belts of bullets. Entire divisions were annihilated in futile charges. This new weapon forced armies to rethink everything, from tactics to technology, spurring the invention of tanks, gas, and creeping artillery barrages. No man's land stands today as one of history's starkest symbols of industrial warfare. Landscapes scarred by relentless fire, where men lived underground and the earth itself seemed at war. Tanks were invented to break stalemates. In the midst of trench warfare's deadlock, engineers sought a machine that could cross barbed wire, withstand gunfire, and crush trenches. The result was the tank, an armored vehicle on continuous tracks, lumbering forward with both menace and promise. First unveiled by the British in 1916, tanks shocked enemies, unused to seeing steel beasts crawl across the battlefield. Though early models were unreliable, breaking down as often as they advanced, they represented a turning point. The tank was conceived as a mobile fortress, carrying firepower and protection across no man's land where men alone could not survive. In time, they evolved into faster, deadlier machines that spearheaded offensives in the Second World War and beyond. The tank's birth reflected human determination to break the immovable, to roll over stalemates with innovation. What began as rattling prototypes became a symbol of modern mechanized war, steel reshaping mud. Flamethrowers appeared in ancient and modern wars. The terrifying image of fire hurled through the air is older than many realize. In ancient Greece, soldiers used tubes of bronze to project flames onto enemy ships. Centuries later, in the First World War, flamethrowers returned as modern inventions. Tanks of pressurized fuel strapped to soldiers' backs, spewing fire dozens of feet into trenches and bunkers. The psychological impact was immense. Enemies often fled at the mere sight of the weapon being prepared. Yet flamethrowers were also perilous for their users, heavy to carry and deadly if struck by gunfire. Despite their limited range, their ability to clear fortified positions kept them in use well into the 20th century. Across time, fire has remained both weapon and symbol, destructive, uncontrollable, and deeply primal. A jet of flame across a battlefield spoke not just of technology, but of humanity's oldest and most fearsome force. Gas masks became essential in World War I. When poison gas first drifted across the trenches in 1915, soldiers faced an invisible enemy. Clouds of chlorine and mustard gas rolled over the battlefield, burning lungs and eyes, searing skin, and leaving entire units incapacitated. Panic swept the trenches as men scrambled to cover their faces with rags soaked in water or urine, primitive defenses against deadly vapors. Soon, armies developed gas masks with rubber seals and glass lenses, transforming soldiers into strange, bug-eyed figures. These masks became as vital as rifles, carried at all times, ready to be donned in seconds. The haunting image of entire companies wearing masks silent behind their filters remains one of the most unsettling symbols of the Great War. Gas made the air itself untrustworthy, a weapon that lingered even after shells stopped falling. The gas mask was humanity's shield against the unseen, fragile, vital, and unforgettable. The Red Baron painted his plane bright red. In the skies of the First World War, a single pilot became legendary. Manfred von Richthofen, known as the Red Baron. Flying a bright red Fokker triplane, he turned aerial combat into a deadly art. At a time when dogfighting was new and chaotic, his painted aircraft stood out deliberately, a symbol of both confidence and psychological warfare. Enemies feared the sight of scarlet wings diving from above, while allies celebrated his string of victories, 80 confirmed kills. The Red Baron's fame grew far beyond his lifetime, inspiring stories, songs, and myths. Yet behind the legend was a disciplined tactician, one who studied angles, speed, and timing to perfection. His aircraft's bold color ensured he was never mistaken for another, even as bullets flew. The Red Baron's crimson streak across the sky remains an enduring image of how war creates both terror and myth. Code talkers used native languages to encrypt orders. During the Second World War, communication was critical and vulnerable. Enemy forces intercepted radio transmissions, seeking to unravel battle plans. The United States turned to an extraordinary solution: Native American code talkers. Speakers of Navajo, Choctaw, and other indigenous languages developed codes that were virtually impossible for enemies to decipher. Messages transmitted in these tongues could travel instantly across battlefields, secure and unbroken. The Navajo code in particular was never cracked, and it played a crucial role in the Pacific, guiding Marines through island campaigns. For the code talkers themselves, it was a moment of both service and irony. Their languages, once suppressed by government policy, became invaluable to national defense. Their legacy is one of brilliance and resilience, a reminder that the most powerful weapons are sometimes the words we carry, hidden in plain sound, woven from culture and memory. Radar was a secret weapon of World War II. In the years before the Second World War, scientists developed a technology that could see what AIs could not: radar. By sending out radio waves and detecting their echoes, radar stations could locate aircraft far beyond the horizon. During the Battle of Britain, radar proved decisive. British operators tracked incoming German bombers, directing fighters to intercept with uncanny precision. To outsiders, it seemed almost supernatural, as if the Royal Air Force always knew where the enemy would appear. Radar shifted warfare into a new dimension, where unseen beams of energy shaped strategy. It spread quickly, guiding ships at sea, protecting cities, and eventually finding submarines. Beyond the war, radar became a staple of navigation, weather forecasting, and even astronomy. But in those tense years, it was a secret edge, invisible lines sweeping the skies, a quiet hum of science standing between survival and defeat. The Enigma machine nearly hid Nazi codes forever. During the Second World War, the German military relied on the Enigma machine to send encrypted messages. This device, with its rotating wheels and electrical circuits, could scramble text into millions of possible combinations. Each day, settings changed, creating codes thought to be unbreakable. German commanders trusted Enigma completely, transmitting strategies across Europe with confidence. But in hidden rooms, Allied mathematicians and cryptanalysts, most famously at Bletchley Park, labored tirelessly to crack it. Alan Turing and his colleagues built early computers to sift through possibilities, eventually finding breakthroughs that revealed the enemy's plans. Their success shortened the war by years, saving countless lives. Enigma machines, captured after the war, show their intricate keys and rotors, mechanical puzzles that once held nations in their grip. Today, they stand as symbols of how human ingenuity and persistence can pry open even the most guarded secrets. Aircraft carriers replaced battleships as dominant power. For centuries, the battleship reigned supreme, massive, armored, bristling with cannons. Yet during the Second World War, a new vessel claimed the seas: the aircraft carrier. Instead of guns, carriers carried planes, launching squadrons capable of striking far beyond the horizon. At Pearl Harbor, Japan's carrier fleet demonstrated the devastating reach of aerial attacks. Later battles, like Midway, confirmed that the era of battleships was over. Carriers became floating airfields, projecting power across oceans. They transformed naval strategy from close-range duels to vast mobile air campaigns. Today, aircraft carriers remain symbols of military dominance, each one a moving city with thousands aboard. Their decks echo with the roar of jet engines rather than cannon fire, yet the principle is the same. Control of the sea means control of destiny. The carrier turned the ocean into a runway, making the sky as decisive as the waves. Kamikaze attacks shocked Allied navies. As the Second World War drew toward its close, Japanese pilots undertook desperate missions that stunned the world. Known as kamikaze, or divine wind, these were suicide attacks where pilots deliberately crashed their planes into enemy ships. Loaded with explosives and fuel, the aircraft became living missiles. For Allied sailors, the sight of a plane diving directly at them was terrifying, and the damage could be catastrophic. Ships burned, crews scrambled, and losses mounted despite layers of defense. To the pilots, it was a final act of sacrifice, framed as honor and duty, though many were young men pressed into service. Kamikaze attacks revealed both the desperation and the resolve of a nation facing defeat. They also marked a grim shift in warfare, where human lives themselves became weapons. The memory of those blazing dives remains etched into the story of the Pacific War. Paratroopers once jumped into pitch-black nights. In the Second World War, a new kind of soldier appeared, the paratrooper. Carried aloft in transport planes, they leapt into darkness, parachutes billowing as they drifted silently toward enemy territory. At Normandy, thousands dropped behind German lines in the early hours of D-Day, scattered across hedgerows and villages. The jump itself was perilous. Anti-aircraft fire lit the sky, winds carried men miles off course, and equipment weighed them down. Yet when they landed, these soldiers struck swiftly, seizing bridges, roads, and defenses to prepare the way for the main invasion. Paratroopers embodied both courage and uncertainty, descending unseen into hostile ground. Their missions often determined the fate of larger campaigns, their risks disproportionate to their numbers. To fall from the night sky, trusting silk and luck, was to embody the raw daring of modern war. Soldiers quite literally dropped into destiny. The Higgins boat made D-Day possible. The vast invasion of Normandy in 1944 required not only bravery, but logistics on a staggering scale. Central to it all was a humble craft, the Higgins boat. With its flat bottom and ramped front, it could carry soldiers and vehicles from ship to shore, grounding itself on beaches before dropping its ramp for troops to storm forward. Without it, landing armored vehicles and masses of infantry would have been nearly impossible. Designed in Louisiana by Andrew Higgins, the boat's simple construction allowed thousands to be built rapidly. On D-Day, wave after wave of Higgins boats delivered men into the chaos of machine guns and surf. Survivors remembered the creak of wood, the roar of engines, and the sudden crash of the ramp falling into the sea. The Higgins boat was not glamorous, but it was indispensable, the bridge between the sea and the battle for Europe. Sherman tanks were mass-produced relentlessly. During the Second World War, the American M4 Sherman tank became the workhorse of Allied armored forces. It was not the most powerful tank on the battlefield. German Tigers and Panthers outgunned it, but the Sherman was reliable, adaptable, and produced in staggering numbers. Factories churned out tens of thousands, supplying armies across Europe and the Pacific. Crews learned to rely on its mechanical dependability, knowing it could be repaired quickly in the field. Shermans could be modified with flamethrowers, amphibious gear, or heavy guns, making them versatile in countless roles. Their true strength lay in numbers and coordination. Where one Sherman faltered, a dozen more pressed forward. For soldiers, climbing into a Sherman meant joining a vast, rolling tide of steel. The tank became a symbol of American industrial might, proof that in war, quantity and resilience could overwhelm even the most formidable opponents. The V-2 rocket was the first ballistic missile. In the closing years of the Second World War, German engineers created a weapon unlike any before, the V-2 rocket. Launched vertically, it soared into the stratosphere before plunging back to Earth at supersonic speed, striking without warning. Unlike bombers, it could not be intercepted once launched. London, Antwerp, and other cities suffered sudden explosions as these silent missiles fell from the sky. The V-2 was terrifying not only for its destruction, but for what it represented, the beginning of long-range guided warfare. After the war, captured V-2s and their scientists fueled both the American and Soviet space programs, turning weapons of terror into the foundations of rockets that would one day reach the moon. Yet in its time, the V-2 symbolized dread, a shadow over cities, a weapon that arrived too fast to flee, too advanced to stop, reshaping both war and the future of technology. The Cold War created doomsday submarines. In the tense decades after the Second World War, nuclear weapons reshaped military strategy. One of the most chilling developments was the nuclear submarine, vessels capable of staying hidden beneath the oceans for months, carrying ballistic missiles that could annihilate entire cities. Known as boomers, these submarines formed a key part of deterrence, ensuring that even if a nation was struck first, it could strike back from the depths. Crews lived in secrecy, cut off from the world, patrolling silently under endless waves. To imagine an unseen fleet lurking below, armed with unimaginable power, was unsettling for both leaders and civilians. These submarines became symbols of both security and terror, guardians of peace through the threat of devastation. In the Cold War, the sea was no longer just a battlefield. It was the hiding place of doomsday itself, waiting patiently in the silence below. Nuclear bombers stayed airborne for days. Before intercontinental missiles became dominant, nuclear bombers were the backbone of deterrence. Vast aircraft like the American B-52 were designed to carry nuclear payloads across continents. During the Cold War, some missions required bombers to remain airborne for entire days, circling constantly, ready to strike at a moment's notice. Aerial refueling allowed them to stay aloft, crews rotating through long, exhausting shifts. For those inside, it was a strange existence, half routine, half apocalyptic readiness. The hum of engines became the soundtrack of a world balanced on the edge of destruction. These bombers symbolized both vulnerability and resolve, a reminder that, at any hour, catastrophe could unfold from the sky. Though missiles would eventually take precedence, the long shadows of nuclear bombers still stretch across history, their wings a constant presence in the uneasy skies of the Cold War. Spy satellites changed recon forever. When the first spy satellites were launched during the Cold War, they transformed intelligence gathering. No longer were nations limited to aircraft that risked being shot down instead. Cameras orbiting hundreds of miles above the Earth captured images of military bases, missile silos, and troop movements. Early satellites even returned film in parachute pods, snatched mid-air by waiting planes. For generals and presidents, the clarity of these photos was astonishing. Secrets once hidden behind borders were suddenly visible from space. Spy satellites reduced the risk of surprise attacks, providing evidence of arms buildups and treaties kept or broken. Their presence was invisible to the people below, but their impact was immense. The Cold War was as much a contest of eyes as weapons, and satellites became the watchful guardians, silently recording from above, turning the heavens into the ultimate observation post. Stealth aircraft were designed to evade radar. By the late 20th century, air defense systems had grown so sophisticated that aircraft needed to vanish from radar itself. Engineers designed stealth planes with angled surfaces and radar-absorbing materials that deflected signals away. The result was aircraft like the F-117 Nighthawk, a strange, faceted machine that looked more like a futuristic sculpture than a plane. Flying at night, it slipped past enemy defenses to strike with precision. To those on the ground, it was as if the sky itself delivered invisible blows. Stealth technology changed not only combat but strategy, allowing nations to strike first and unseen. Though expensive and complex, these planes embodied the cutting edge of modern warfare, machines designed to hide rather than intimidate, to be unseen rather than overwhelming. In their dark, angular forms, stealth aircraft carried both the fear of the unknown and the power of invisibility. Night vision turned darkness into advantage. For most of history, darkness was a soldier's greatest ally or enemy. Armies feared night attacks, unable to see beyond flickering torches. But in the 20th century, technology gave warriors new eyes. Night vision, first developed during the Second World War and refined in the Cold War, used infrared light to reveal shapes hidden in the dark. Suddenly, shadows became landscapes, and movements invisible to the human eye glowed in eerie green. Soldiers could now march, aim, and fight without lanterns to betray their position. This advantage transformed tactics. Darkness was no longer concealment, but a stage for precision strikes. The image of troops with glowing lenses has become iconic, a blend of science fiction and stark reality. Night vision altered the balance between fear and confidence, turning midnight from a veil into an open field of possibility, the night itself no longer safe. Drones took over modern skies. Once, aircraft required pilots willing to risk their lives. Now, unmanned aerial vehicles, drones, soar above battlefields, guided from control stations thousands of miles away. At first, drones served as reconnaissance tools, quietly circling to gather intelligence. But soon they carried weapons, launching missiles with precision on targets far below. Their presence changed warfare dramatically, offering persistence in the air for hours or days without fatigue. To enemies, drones became an invisible menace, buzzing overhead before striking without warning. Yet drones also sparked ethical debates, raising questions about distance, accountability, and the human cost of remote war. In many ways, they echo the balloons of the 19th century, eyes in the sky, but with lethality added. The drone age demonstrates how machines have stepped into roles once reserved for people, making the sky both emptier and more crowded than ever before. Cyber warfare may be the new battlefield. Not all modern wars are fought with bullets and bombs. In the 21st century, cyberspace emerged as a battlefield of its own. Hackers infiltrate systems, stealing secrets, disrupting power grids, or even crippling infrastructure without firing a shot. Nations deploy digital arsenals, capable of silencing communication networks or paralyzing financial systems. The battlefield now includes every computer, every satellite link, every server farm humming quietly in distant warehouses. Unlike traditional warfare, cyber attacks can be launched anonymously, across oceans, and in seconds. Victories are measured in stolen data, silenced screens, or halted supply chains. For civilians, the effects may be invisible until lights go out, banks freeze, or messages vanish. Cyber warfare reflects humanity's shift. Our dependence on technology has created a new vulnerability, and our conflicts have followed us into this unseen domain. The front line is no longer physical, it is everywhere and nowhere at once. Ancient fort walls once housed entire cities. In ancient times, war and daily life often coexisted within the same stone walls. Fortified cities rose across Mesopotamia, Greece, and beyond. Their towering walls not just barriers but homes, markets, and temples nestled within. Citizens lived under constant protection, knowing invaders might appear at any moment. These fortresses were both sanctuary and trap, safe from sudden raids, yet vulnerable to drawn-out sieges. The walls themselves were massive undertakings, requiring thousands of laborers to quarry stone, transport it, and stack it into defenses that could stand for centuries. Some, like Jericho's, date back over 8,000 years, among the earliest monumental structures ever built. Within these walls, life thrived, commerce bustled, families grew, and leaders governed, all under the looming shadow of potential war. Ancient fortifications remind us that for much of history, survival meant building communities inside armor of stone. Siege towers crawled slowly toward castle walls. To overcome the towering defenses of castles and walled cities, besieging armies constructed massive wooden towers. Rising as tall as the walls they attacked, siege towers rolled forward on wheels, covered in hides to resist fire and arrows. Inside, soldiers climbed ladders to reach upper platforms, ready to pour across the battlements once the tower bridged the gap. The advance was slow, noisy, and terrifying for defenders watching the structure inch closer day by day. Arrows rained down, stones were hurled, yet still the towers crawled forward, relentless machines of wood and iron. Inside, attackers huddled in cramped darkness, waiting for the moment to storm upward into the chaos of hand-to-hand combat. Siege towers embodied determination, the stubborn refusal to let walls dictate fate. They were both engineering marvels and looming nightmares, wooden giants advancing against stone giants, battles of patience and dread. Trebuchets could fling boulders hundreds of yards. Among the greatest engines of medieval siege warfare was the trebuchet, a vast catapult powered not by twisted ropes, but by the swinging of a massive counterweight. When released, the weight dropped, hurling the sling upward and launching stones, firepots, or even rotting carcasses into enemy fortresses. The range was astonishing. Hundreds of yards of devastating arcs, smashing towers and battering walls. Trebuchets were also psychological weapons defenders watched helplessly as each shot thundered toward them, knowing the next could collapse their stronghold. Building such machines required carpenters, engineers, and vast supplies of timber, turning warfare into feats of construction. Unlike cannons, trebuchets made no smoke, only the groaning of wood and the crash of impact. They were the giants of their age, blending physics and brute force, reminders that ingenuity could turn even gravity itself into a weapon against stone and steel. Hot oil was rarely poured, sand was deadlier. Legends often depict defenders pouring boiling oil from castle walls, but in truth, oil was far too valuable to waste. What was more common, and far more effective, was heated sand. Fine grains, superheated over fires, could be poured through narrow openings onto attackers. The sand slipped beneath armor, burning skin and searing flesh in ways water or oil could not. Soldiers clawed desperately to remove it, often worsening the injury. Other substances included quicklime, which blinded eyes when inhaled, or simple stones and logs hurled down. Defenders used what was practical, not dramatic, but the results were equally terrifying. The myth of boiling oil persists because of its cinematic horror. Yet history shows that clever, simple materials, grains of sand, powdery lime, often became the most vicious tools of defense. The castle wall itself was only part of the danger. Naval boarding axes doubled as tools and weapons. On wooden warships, sailors relied on versatile tools for both survival and combat. One such tool was the boarding axe, a compact weapon with a sharp blade on one side and a spike or hammer on the other. In peaceful moments, it was used to cut tangled ropes, clear wreckage, or even chop through burning timbers to stop a fire from spreading. But in battle, boarding axes became lethal instruments. Sailors swung them to slash through rigging, crippling enemy ships, or wielded them in brutal close combat once ships collided and boarding parties surged across decks. Their dual purpose made them indispensable, neither purely tool nor weapon, but both at once. The boarding axe embodies the raw practicality of naval warfare. Survival demanded versatility, and every object had to serve multiple roles. In the chaos of smoke and waves, it was both lifeline and blade. Boarding nets could trap attacking pirates. When pirates threatened merchant vessels, captains turned to clever defenses. One was the boarding net, heavy mesh stretched along the sides of ships, rising like barriers above the deck. Pirates trying to leap aboard found themselves tangled, exposed to counterattack as sailors struck from above. Some nets were reinforced with rope soaked in tar or even lined with blades, making them dangerous to cut through. In the sudden clash of a boarding attempt, nets could mean the difference between capture and survival. Pirates, ever resourceful, devised ways to counter them: hooks, long poles, or sheer determination. But the delay often gave defenders time to fight back. Boarding nets reveal the intimate, brutal nature of naval combat, where survival depended not on great cannons, but on a few feet of rope, stretched taut, holding back chaos and saving lives from the edge of the Aeed. Sea. War drums could intimidate as much as signal. Across cultures, war drums carried rhythms of both command and fear. In Africa, massive drums boomed across battlefields, their vibrations stirring courage in warriors while unsettling enemies. Among the Ottomans, the Mater bands pounded kettle drums and clashed cymbals, filling the air with a wall of sound that shook nerves before swords even clashed. Native American tribes used drums to rally warriors and summon spiritual strength, their beats echoing with meaning beyond strategy. For armies, rhythm created unity, keeping lines steady, guiding maneuvers through chaos. But for those facing the drums, the sound could feel like a heartbeat magnified, an omen of what was coming. War drums remind us that sound itself is a weapon, capable of striking the mind before any blade touches the body. In every culture, the beat of war was not just noise, but the pulse of battle itself. War horns once announced entire armies. From ancient times, horns carried the voices of armies across valleys and plains. Roman cornua and tubi signaled formations to advance or retreat, their blaring tones cutting through the din. In the Hebrew Bible, the shofar sounded to inspire warriors and announce divine presence. Norse sagas tell of horns calling warriors to arms, their echoes carrying across fjords. The sheer volume of these instruments amplified armies, making them seem larger and more fearsome. Horns could also confuse enemies, who might misinterpret signals or imagine reinforcements approaching. To hear the long note of a war horn was to feel dread and anticipation, a sound that transcended language. Even today, bugles and ceremonial horns survive in military traditions, echoes of a time when breath and brass directed thousands. The horn was not only communication, but a voice of destiny, heralding battle before swords were ever drawn. Body paint was used to terrify enemies. For many warrior cultures, battle preparation was not only about weapons but transformation. Body paint turned fighters into fearsome visions, their skin streaked with colors carrying symbolic meaning. Celtic warriors were said to paint themselves with woad, a blue dye that made them look ghostly and otherworldly. Native American warriors used patterns of red, black, and white, each signifying different aspects of war, courage, or mourning. The Maori of New Zealand combined paint with intricate tattoos, their faces and bodies becoming living masks of intimidation. Paint was both psychological weapon and spiritual armor, a shield of identity and meaning. To see an enemy painted in stark, vivid colors was to face not just a man, but a presence, something larger, ancestral, elemental. Body paint was war art, a reminder that the battlefield is not only physical but also symbolic, where fear itself is wielded like a weapon. Camouflage was practiced long before modern times. Though modern armies wear mottled greens and browns, the art of blending with one's surroundings is far older. Hunters and warriors of countless cultures understood that survival often meant invisibility. Native American fighters used mud, foliage, and ash to conceal themselves in forests and plains. In Japan, ninja relied on dark clothing to melt into shadows, while in Africa, hunters coated themselves in dust and leaves to stalk prey or enemies. Even in the 18th century, some European light infantry broke from the tradition of bright uniforms, adopting duller colors to hide in terrain. True standardized camouflage uniforms would not appear until the 20th century, but the principle, to vanish into the environment, was universal. To paint, cover, or clothe oneself in nature's palette was to use the earth as an ally, turning sight itself into a battlefield and invisibility into survival. Feigned retreats could lure foes into ambushes. One of the most cunning strategies in military history was the false retreat. Warriors pretended to flee in panic, luring eager enemies into pursuit, only to turn and counterattack with devastating precision. The Mongols perfected this tactic, galloping away while shooting backward from horseback, drawing foes into traps where hidden riders waited. The Vikings also used such ruses, abandoning camps or ships to tempt overconfident pursuers into vulnerable positions. Even in medieval Europe, commanders recognized the value of apparent weakness as a mask for hidden strength. The feigned retreat required disciplined panic had to be convincingly acted, yet troops needed to wheel back in perfect order when the moment came. To fall for such deception was humiliating and costly. It reminds us that warfare is not only about strength of arms, but cleverness of mind, where retreat might be the beginning of victory. War dogs were armored in ancient Rome. In the armies of ancient Rome, not all warriors walked on two legs. Dogs, bred for strength and ferocity, marched alongside legions as companions and weapons. Known as Moloshian hounds, these animals were sometimes fitted with armor, spiked collars to protect their throats, metal plates to shield their backs, and even blades attached to their sides. Trained to charge into enemy lines, they sowed fear and confusion, snapping at horses and men alike. Roman writers described these dogs as relentless, refusing to back down even against overwhelming odds. Beyond the battlefield, they also served as guards for camps and sentries during long marches. The armored war dog stood as both symbol and tool of Roman might, embodying loyalty and ferocity. They remind us that humanity's oldest companions were also drawn into its darkest struggles, fighting side by side with soldiers in the dust of empire. Messenger pigeons saved thousands of lives. In an age before radios and satellites, armies turned to one of nature's most reliable navigators, the homing pigeon. These birds, trained to fly back to their lofts over vast distances, carried messages in tiny capsules strapped to their legs. During the First World War, pigeons became vital, soaring over battlefields too dangerous for runners or telegraphs. One pigeon, named armies, delivered a message despite being shot through the chest and losing a leg, saving nearly 200 trapped soldiers. Their service continued into the Second World War, where pigeons often succeeded when radios failed. Silent, swift, and tireless, they were humble heroes, their wings carrying words that meant survival or disaster. After wars ended, some pigeons were even decorated for bravery. Their story is a reminder that victory sometimes depended not on machines of steel, but on fragile creatures whose instincts never faltered. Elephants once carried towers of archers. War elephants were not only massive beasts of intimidation, they were also platforms of power. Armies in India, Persia, and beyond fitted elephants with wooden towers, or howdahs, strapped to their backs. From these elevated platforms, archers and spear throwers could rain missiles down upon enemies, shielded by the sheer bulk of their living fortress. The psychological effect was immense. To face a wall of elephants bearing soldiers above was to face both animal and army at once. The elephants themselves were armored, their tusks sometimes tipped with iron. Yet controlling them was difficult. In panic, they could trample their own side. Still, the image of elephants carrying towers of warriors across plains remains one of the most striking in military history. They were at once symbols of kingship, engines of war, and reminders that the natural world was drafted into humanity's battles. War canoes could hold hundreds of warriors. Across the Pacific and in parts of Africa, war was waged not from castles or cavalry, but from great canoes. These vessels, carved from massive trees or assembled with planks, could stretch over 100 feet long, carrying entire war parties across rivers, lakes, and seas. In Polynesia, canoes decorated with carvings and feathers transported chiefs and warriors to distant islands, their sails and paddles flashing across the waves. In Africa, great canoes carried hundreds down the Niger River, swift-moving flotillas that struck suddenly before vanishing into waterways. The size and craftsmanship of these canoes were astonishing. Some required coordination of dozens of paddlers to move in unison, their chants and drums keeping rhythm. To see such a vessel glide toward shore, filled with armed men, was both beautiful and terrifying. These canoes were floating armies, extensions of land power into waterborne might. Scythed chariots had blades on their wheels. Among the more fearsome inventions of ancient warfare were scythed chariots. These were not ordinary vehicles, but instruments of terror. Chariots fitted with long, curved blades extending from their axles. As they charged through enemy ranks, the blades sliced and tore, cutting down soldiers in gruesome sweeps. Originating in the armies of Persia and later used by other cultures, scythed chariots were designed to break formations by sheer panic as much as physical destruction. Horses galloped forward, the whirling blades turning the ground into chaos. Yet their effectiveness was debated. Disciplined troops could sometimes hold formation, letting the chariots pass through with limited damage. Still, the image of spinning blades tearing across a battlefield left a lasting impression. They symbolize humanity's willingness to weaponize ingenuity in unsettling ways, turning transport into terror, wheels into weapons, and speed into devastation. Boiling water defended castle gates. While attackers devised ever more elaborate siege engines, defenders relied on clever, brutal simplicity. One method was pouring boiling water over invaders attempting to breach gates or climb ladders. Heated in great cauldrons, the water scalded flesh through armor, slipping into joints and seams, leaving burns impossible to ignore in the chaos of battle. Unlike scarce oil, water was plentiful and effective. Some defenders added salt or grit, making burns deeper and more painful. Attackers who survived often carried scars for life, a reminder of the danger of pressing too close to fortified walls. Pouring boiling water was more than cruelty. It was efficiency, a way to multiply the strength of defenders against foes more numerous and better armed. Castles were not passive walls of stone, they were active machines of defense, where every opening could unleash sudden agony from above. Star forts were built to resist cannon fire. When cannons made tall castle walls obsolete, architects devised a new design: the star fort. With angled bastions jutting out like the points of a star, these fortresses absorbed cannon fire in ways square or round towers never could. Sloped earthworks softened impacts, while overlapping lines of fire ensured that attackers faced a deadly crossfire from every angle. Seen from above, they resembled geometric flowers, intricate and purposeful. Italy pioneered the design in the 15th century, but soon star forts spread across Europe, Asia, and the Americas. They guarded colonial outposts, cities, and harbors, their low, sprawling forms blending into the landscape. Many survive today, their grassy ramparts masking the fearsome purpose for which they were built. Star forts represent the fusion of mathematics, geometry, and war, proof that as weapons evolved, so too did the art of defense, turning science into survival. Warships were sometimes set on fire as weapons. Throughout history, fire has been both ally and terror at sea. When naval battles turned desperate, some commanders turned ships into weapons themselves, fire ships. Old or expendable vessels were packed with pitch, tar, oil, and kindling, then set ablaze and sent drifting into enemy fleets. The sight of a flaming ship, sails ablaze and timbers crackling, sent sailors into panic. Fire spread rapidly across wooden decks, ropes, and sails, threatening entire squadrons. Fire ships were used by the Greeks, the English against the Spanish Armada, and countless others. Controlling them was nearly impossible once they were lit. Crews often abandoned them at the last moment, rowing to safety. Though unpredictable, fire ships symbolized the desperate ingenuity of naval warfare. They transformed vessels of wood into floating infernos, reminders that sometimes the greatest weapon was destruction itself, unleashed upon the sea. The phalanx could crush armies with unity. In ancient Greece, the phalanx formation became the cornerstone of warfare. Hoplites, heavily armed infantrymen, stood shoulder to shoulder, shields overlapping and spears jutting outward in bristling rows. Individually, each soldier was vulnerable, but together, they became nearly unstoppable. The phalanx moved as one body, advancing slowly, pressing with shield and spear until enemies broke under the wall of bronze. Discipline was everything. If even a few men faltered, the formation could collapse. The phalanx epitomized the Greek belief in collective strength, that survival and victory came from unity, not individuality. In battles such as Marathon and Thermopylae, the phalanx proved its power against larger forces. Yet it had limits. Rough terrain or flexible tactics could unravel its cohesion. Still, for centuries, the phalanx dominated, a human machine built from trust, discipline, and shared destiny. To march in its ranks was to become part of something larger. War standards served as symbols of honor. Flags, banners, and standards have always carried meaning far beyond cloth and color. In ancient Rome, a legion's eagle standard was guarded with almost sacred devotion. Losing it was considered catastrophic dishonor. Across cultures, standards rallied troops, providing both identity and inspiration. On chaotic battlefields, men looked for their banner to know where their comrades stood and where they should fight. Enemies sought to capture them, knowing the psychological blow was as great as any physical loss. Standards often bore symbols of faith, kingship, or heritage, dragons, crosses, suns, and eagles, transforming fabric into power. Even today, military flags are carried with reverence in ceremonies, echoing the battlefield's intensity. A standard was more than a marker. It was a soul, the visible heart of an army. To defend it was duty, to lose it was shame, and to raise it again was triumph. Sappers dug under walls to collapse them. Sieges were battles of patience, and one of the most dramatic techniques was sapping, digging tunnels beneath enemy walls. Miners would quietly burrow under fortifications, shoring up their tunnels with wood. Once deep enough, they filled the chamber with combustible materials: wood, straw, tar, and set it ablaze. The supports burned away, and the weight of the wall above collapsed into the void. Defenders, aware of this danger, dug countermines, listening for the faint scrape of enemy picks in the earth. Sometimes battles erupted underground, in narrow tunnels lit only by torches. The struggle beneath mirrored the war above, unseen but decisive. Sapping required immense labor and risk, yet when successful, it toppled fortresses thought impregnable. It reminds us that warfare often burrowed into unexpected places, where silence and patience carved as much victory as any sword or cannon. Warships once fired heated cannonballs. In the age of sail, naval battles were dominated not just by broadsides of iron shot, but by heated cannonballs. In port, gunners stoked furnaces to heat iron balls until they glowed red, then carefully loaded them into cannons. Fired into enemy ships, these blazing projectiles embedded in timbers and ignited fires that spread uncontrollably. Wooden vessels rigged with tarred ropes and canvas sails were highly flammable, making fire a deadly threat. Handling such ammunition was perilous. One mistake could ignite the firing ship itself. Yet the psychological effect was immense. No sailor wanted to see smoke rising from his own deck. Heated shot was used with devastating effect in coastal forts as well, driving attackers back with the dual threat of iron and flame. It turned artillery into fire starters, blurring the line between cannon and fireship, steel and inferno. The dreadnought revolutionized naval power. In 1906, the launch of HMS Dreadnought changed naval warfare forever. Unlike earlier battleships, it carried an all-big-gun armament, 10 massive 12-inch guns, and was powered by steam turbines that made it faster than any rival. Instantly, every other warship in the world was rendered obsolete. Nations scrambled to build their own dreadnoughts, triggering a global naval arms race that helped set the stage for the First World War. To sailors, the dreadnought was awe-inspiring, vast, bristling with firepower, a floating fortress unlike anything before. Its dominance was not just in strength, but in symbolism. Whoever had the most dreadnoughts ruled the seas. The very word dreadnoughty came to mean power, fear, and progress. Though later eclipsed by aircraft carriers, the dreadnought remains a landmark in history, proof that one ship could redefine an entire age of naval warfare. Cavalry bugles once directed maneuvers. In the age before radios, mounted troops relied on bugles to carry orders across the din of hooves and battle. Each note or call signaled a different maneuver: charge, retreat, regroup, or flank. Riders trained to recognize the patterns instantly, reacting in unison as one organism. Bugle calls were crisp and piercing, designed to cut through chaos. For cavalry, speed was life, and clear communication meant survival. The bugle became a trusted companion, as vital as any sword or carbine. Even outside of war, its notes lingered in tradition, reveille, taps, and ceremonial calls that still echo in military life today. On battlefields, bugles were more than music. They were voices of command, carrying clarity across thunder and smoke. To hear a bugle's sharp cry was to know destiny was shifting, that the cavalry was on the move. Bayonet charges still happened in the 20th century. Though the bayonet belonged to the musket age, its use lingered well into the 20th century. Soldiers in the First World War, after exhausting ammunition in trench fighting, sometimes surged forward with bayonets fixed, clashing in desperate close combat. In the Second World War, bayonet charges were rarer, but still occurred in moments of chaos or surprise. Even during the Korean War, accounts describe units charging with bayonets flashing, shouting to intimidate foes. The weapon's psychological weight often mattered more than its physical use. The sight of determined soldiers advancing with blades fixed could break morale even before contact. By then, rifles had become far deadlier than cold steel, yet the bayonet symbolized resolve, bravery, and aggression. Its enduring presence shows that war is not only fought with technology, but with the raw human will to close distance and meet face to face. Naval mines lurked beneath harbors. Hidden beneath the water's surface, naval mines became silent killers. Anchored to the seabed or floating just below the waves, they detonated on contact with a ship's hull, ripping holes below the waterline. First appearing in the 19th century, mines became especially feared in the world wars, sealing off harbors, straits, and shipping lanes. Unlike visible fleets, mines created invisible walls of danger. Sailors dreaded the sudden blast, unseen, until it was too late. Mines were relatively cheap to deploy but costly to clear, shaping naval strategy as much as battleships did. Entire operations slowed or halted because waters were mined. Even today, naval mines remain a threat, lingering long after war's end, waiting silently in forgotten waters. They are reminders that sometimes the deadliest weapons are the quietest, requiring no movement at all, just patience, steel, and silence. Torpedoes changed submarine combat. The torpedo transformed submarines from scouts into hunters. Self-propelled underwater missiles, torpedoes could travel unseen beneath the waves before striking ships with explosive force. Early versions in the late 19th century were crude, but by the World Wars, they became sophisticated, guided by gyroscopes and propelled by compressed air or fuel. Submarines lurking in the depths could fire, then slip away, leaving only a deadly trail of bubbles. Convoys and warships lived in constant fear of sudden explosions beneath them. The sinking of massive vessels, such as the Lusitania, revealed the torpedo's power to shock the world. Torpedoes shifted naval warfare from surface duels to unseen threats, where danger came from the depths rather than the horizon. They remained staples of modern navies, evolving with guidance systems and stealth. In their cold, mechanical way, torpedoes gave the ocean a new kind of predator. Biplanes dogfought in the skies. In the First World War, fragile wooden biplanes took to the skies, sparking the first era of aerial combat. With canvas wings stacked in pairs, these aircraft were nimble but delicate, often held together with little more than wire and determination. Pilots met in the skies for dogfights, twisting and diving in dizzying duels. Machine guns synchronized to fire through spinning propellers turned planes into flying weapons. Heroes and aces emerged, their victories counted like duels of knights in the sky. The romance of dogfighting belied its brutal reality. Many pilots survived only weeks, their cockpits exposed and their engines unreliable. Yet these early air battles captured the world's imagination, transforming the sky into a new battlefield of courage and innovation. To see two planes circling above a trench line was to witness a new chapter in war, the birth of combat in the heavens. War trains carried armored cannons. Railroads revolutionized logistics, moving troops and supplies faster than ever. but they also became weapons themselves. War trains, armored with steel plating and bristling with cannons, patrolled tracks like mobile fortresses. Some carried anti-aircraft guns, others heavy artillery pieces capable of bombarding miles away. They were both transport and terror, thundering along rails while spewing firepower. In Russia's civil war, armored trains carried entire platoons, launching raids across vast steppes. In the world wars, they protected vital supply lines, turning tracks into arteries of both sustenance and destruction. Their strength was immense, but their weakness obvious. Bound to rails, they were vulnerable if tracks were sabotaged. Still, the sight of a war train, smoke billowing, armor gleaming, left a powerful impression. They were rolling fortresses, blending industry and warfare, symbols of how technology reshaped even the landscape itself into weapons. Zeppelins bombed cities in World War I. During the First World War, massive airships known as Zeppelins floated over cities, dropping bombs from the night sky. These hydrogen-filled giants, longer than ocean liners, could drift silently for hours before unleashing destruction. Londoners watched in fear as searchlights scanned the heavens, seeking the looming shapes above. Though their bombs were small compared to later weapons, the psychological impact was enormous. For the first time, civilians far from battlefields faced attacks from the air. Zeppelins were vulnerable. However, once targeted by incendiary bullets, they erupted in fiery infernos that lit the night. Despite their weaknesses, they foreshadowed the aerial bombing campaigns of the future. To see a Zeppelin overhead was to glimpse both awe and dread, the marvel of human flight turned into a looming shadow, beautiful and terrifying as it drifted silently toward its target. Anti-aircraft guns filled the skies with fire. As planes became vital to warfare, defending against them became urgent. Anti-aircraft guns rose from the trenches, swiveling skyward to blast shells into the air. Explosions created deadly shrapnel clouds, tearing into wings and fuselages. Pilots learned to weave and dive, trying to dodge the bursts of fire that filled the heavens. The Second World War saw anti-aircraft batteries guarding cities, ships, and factories, their barrages lighting the night. For civilians, the sound of flak bursting overhead was terrifying, an audible reminder that the war had come above their heads. Anti-aircraft guns symbolized the arms race between offense and defense, a duel fought in the very sky. Though missiles would later replace them, the sight of rows of guns tilting upward remains iconic, steel arms reaching into the heavens, determined to bring down the shadows passing above. Napalm became a controversial weapon. During the 20th century, napalm emerged as one of the most infamous weapons of war. A sticky gel of gasoline and chemicals, it clung to whatever it touched, burning at extreme temperatures. First developed in the Second World War, it was later used extensively in conflicts like Korea and Vietnam. Napalm's power was undeniable. It cleared jungles, destroyed fortifications, and terrified enemies. But its cruelty was immense. Fires spread uncontrollably, and civilians often suffered alongside combatants. Images of villages ablaze and civilians scarred turned global opinion against its use, making napalm a symbol of the horrors of modern war. Unlike precision weapons, napalm embodied raw, indiscriminate destruction. Its very name became shorthand for terror, a reminder that progress in technology often brings shadows as well as light. In napalm's burning glow, the world saw both military might and human tragedy. Helicopters turned battlefields vertical. The arrival of helicopters gave armies the power to move not just across the land, but above it. Vertical lift allowed soldiers to land in jungles, mountains, and rooftops where no road existed. In the Korean War, and especially Vietnam, helicopters became lifelines, ferrying troops, evacuating wounded, and providing fire support. The iconic Huey helicopter, its rotors thundering, symbolized both mobility and danger. For the first time, armies could fight fluid battles without relying on roads or terrain, inserting troops directly into hotspots and extracting them in moments. Helicopters blurred the line between transport and combat, bristling with rockets and machine guns. They gave rise to the concept of air cavalry, swift-moving forces as mobile as horsemen of old. The helicopter transformed modern warfare into a three-dimensional contest, where the vertical world, once inaccessible, became the new front line of strategy and survival. Smart bombs could guide themselves. In the late 20th century, bombs gained minds of their own. Smart bombs, equipped with guidance systems using lasers, satellites, or television cameras, could steer toward targets with remarkable accuracy. Unlike traditional bombs, which simply fell where dropped, these weapons adjusted mid-flight, correcting errors and striking with precision. Their use minimized collateral damage compared to older munitions, though not without controversy. Pilots relied on laser designators or GPS signals, guiding bombs down narrow paths into bunkers, bridges, or enemy positions. The Gulf War showcased their power to the world, as footage of bombs threading into exact targets amazed and unsettled viewers. Smart bombs reflected the growing fusion of technology and warfare, the replacement of brute force with pinpoint strikes. Yet behind the precision was still destruction, reminders that even intelligence in weapons does not erase their consequences, only reshapes them. Satellite navigation now directs missiles. Once, navigating across oceans or deserts required stars, maps, and compasses. Today, satellites orbiting high above Earth provide instant precision. The Global Positioning System, or GPS, originally developed by the US military, guides missiles with uncanny accuracy. A weapon can be launched hundreds of miles away and still strike within meters of its target, guided by signals from the sky. This revolutionized warfare, allowing strikes in any weather, day or night, with far fewer errors. Yet reliance on satellites introduced new vulnerabilities. Jamming, hacking, or destroying satellites could cripple entire systems. What began as a navigational aid became the heartbeat of modern armies, directing planes, ships, and vehicles alike. To think that battles are now shaped by silent machines circling the Earth is humbling, a reminder that even the heavens themselves have been drafted into humanity's endless conflicts. Hypersonic weapons are being developed. Today, nations race to create weapons that move faster than ever before. Hypersonic missiles. Traveling at speeds greater than 5 times the speed of sound, these weapons are almost impossible to intercept. They blur the line between aircraft and projectile, gliding across the atmosphere with maneuverability and speed that overwhelm defenses. Hypersonic technology represents the latest stage in an ancient story, the quest to strike faster, farther, and with greater certainty. Their arrival could redefine global security, shrinking reaction times from hours to minutes. For now, they remain largely experimental, but their potential is staggering. To imagine a weapon streaking through the sky faster than the human eye can follow is both awe-inspiring and unsettling. Hypersonic missiles show us that warfare continues to evolve, always reaching for the horizon of possibility, even as humanity grapples with the shadows such speed may cast. War has moved into outer space. For millennia, battlefields stretched across land and sea. In the 20th century, they moved to the skies. And now, they have reached beyond our planet itself. Satellites orbiting Earth carry not only communication and navigation systems, but also the potential to wage war. During the Cold War, both the United States and the Soviet Union experimented with space weapons, from missile-killing satellites to concepts of orbital bombardment. Today, militaries guard against cyber attacks on satellites, knowing that disabling them could cripple armies below. Some nations have tested anti-satellite missiles, shattering old craft into clouds of debris that linger as hazards. Though no shots have been fired directly in space battles, the stage is set. The heavens are no longer untouched. What was once the realm of stars and dreams has become another frontier of defense, proving that humanity carries its conflicts wherever it goes. Ancient warships rammed each other with bronze beaks. In the Mediterranean world of Greece and Rome, naval combat was not about cannons or sails, but about ramming. Warships called triremes and quinquiremes carried bronze-tipped rams at their prows, sharpened beaks designed to smash holes in enemy hulls. Crews of rowers propelled their vessels with explosive bursts of speed, striking like arrows across the water. The clash of wood and bronze echoed as ships splintered, men hurled into the sea amidst shattered planks. To master this art, commanders drilled crews endlessly, training them to maneuver in tight formations, turning whole fleets into weapons of precision. Battles were decided not by fire, but by impact, as one ship tore through another's side. The ram symbolized power, discipline, and danger, a predator's beak on the prow of a wooden beast. These ancient warships remind us that naval combat once meant becoming the spear itself, aimed by human hands. The Roman testudo shield wall was nearly impenetrable. Among the most famous formations of Rome was the testudo, or tortoise. Soldiers locked their large rectangular shields together on all sides and above, creating a living fortress of wood and iron. From the outside, it resembled a giant shell creeping slowly forward. Arrows and stones rained harmlessly upon it, bouncing away from the slanted surfaces. In sieges, the testudo allowed troops to approach walls under withering fire, advancing step by step until they could batter down gates or set ladders in place. Discipline was essential. One soldier breaking formation could expose the entire group. To those inside, the world narrowed to the thud of arrows striking shields, the muffled shouts of comrades, and the determination to keep moving. The testudo embodied Roman ideals, order, unity, and unyielding persistence. It was not fast or flashy, but it was nearly unstoppable, a wall made of men. Spartan hoplites trained from childhood. In Sparta, warriors were not made in adulthood, they were shaped from childhood. At the age of 7, boys entered the agoge, a rigorous system of training that prepared them for a lifetime of military service. They learned endurance through hunger and hardship, discipline through harsh punishment, and loyalty through constant drills. Their shields were heavier than most, their spears longer, their bodies hardened by years of exercise and combat practice. By adulthood, the Spartan hoplite was more than a soldier. He was the product of an entire society dedicated to war. To fight in the phalanx was not just duty, it was destiny. Every Spartan carried the weight of tradition, honor, and survival, for their city relied on their strength. The training forged men who could stand unflinching in the face of overwhelming odds, symbols of unity, sacrifice, and the unbreakable will of their people. Samurai practiced archery before swordsmanship. Though samurai are often remembered for their swords, their earliest martial tradition was the bow. Before the katana became iconic, samurai warriors trained as mounted archers, perfecting the art of yabusame, shooting arrows from horseback at full gallop. Archery was not only a battlefield skill, but also a spiritual discipline, embodying balance, focus, and harmony. Swords were sidearms, drawn when enemies closed in, but the bow gave samurai reach and versatility. Even after firearms arrived in Japan, archery remained part of samurai culture, blending ritual with war. The shift to the sword as their primary symbol came later, as peace under the Tokugawa shogunate emphasized personal dueling and the artistry of blades. Yet at their roots, the samurai were archers first, warriors who united speed, precision, and grace. Their story reminds us that icons often hide deeper histories where the true weapon was discipline itself. Knights wore surcoats to display heraldry. In the Middle Ages, armored knights often covered their mail and plate with brightly colored surcoats, long tunics displaying coats of arms, symbols, and colors unique to families or lords. In the chaos of battle, where visors concealed faces and steel looked alike, heraldry provided identity. Friends and allies could distinguish one another, while enemies could recognize noble lineage at a glance. These designs carried deep meaning: lions for courage, crosses for faith, chevrons for protection. Surcoats also protected armor from the sun's heat and rain, practical garments layered with symbolism. In tournaments, knights displayed their surcoats proudly, their colors fluttering as they charged in jousts. On battlefields, banners and surcoats worked together as visual language, painting war with identity and pride. To wear a surcoat was to carry not only one's own honor, but the reputation of family and heritage stitched across cloth. Highlanders charged with bagpipes blaring. In the Scottish Highlands, music itself was a weapon of morale and intimidation. Bagpipes, with their haunting, wailing tones, accompanied warriors into battle. The skirl of the pipes echoed across hills and glens, raising courage in Highland clans and unnerving their foes. During the Jacobite risings, pipers marched at the front, their tunes guiding fighters through smoke and confusion. To the English, the sound became so associated with rebellion that bagpipes were once banned as instruments of war. Yet the tradition endured, carried into later centuries when Scottish regiments fought abroad. Even in the world wars, pipers played troops into battle, their music mingling defiance with sorrow. The pipes were more than instruments. They were voices of heritage, reminders that culture itself marched with warriors. Each note carried memory, pride, and the fierce spirit of those who charged under the banner of the Highlands. War feathers carried symbolic meanings. Across the Americas and beyond, feathers were more than decoration. They were symbols of courage, identity, and spiritual connection. In many Native American cultures, warriors earned eagle feathers through acts of bravery, each plume a visible record of honor. Headdresses became living histories, every feather a story of risk and survival. Among the Aztecs, brightly colored feathers from tropical birds adorned warriors' helmets and shields, transforming them into dazzling figures meant to awe allies and intimidate enemies. Feathers linked warriors to the natural world, embodying swiftness, strength, or the favor of the divine. They fluttered on battlefields as more than ornaments; they were badges of power, visible to all. To wear feathers in war was to declare not only readiness for combat, but connection to something higher. They were light, fragile things, yet they carried weight heavier than steel, the weight of honor. Aztec warriors captured enemies for sacrifice. In Aztec warfare, the goal was not always to kill, but to capture. Warriors sought to take prisoners alive, to offer them later in ritual sacrifices to the gods. Capturing enemies demanded skill, bravery, and restraint, for striking too hard could end the prize. Captives were bound and led back to Tenochtitlan, where they played roles in elaborate ceremonies that reaffirmed cosmic balance. Success in capturing foes elevated a warrior's status, earning him feathers, honors, and prestige. Young Aztec men aspired to take their first captive as a step into adulthood. This system reshaped battle itself. where victory was measured not by territory or plunder, but by the number of lives brought home for the gods. To fight the Aztecs was to risk not just death, but transformation into an offering, part of a cycle where war, religion, and sacrifice were bound tightly together. Incan messengers ran relay marathons during wars. High in the Andes, the Inca built vast networks of roads stretching thousands of miles across mountains and valleys. Along these routes, chasquis, swift-footed messengers, relayed messages, carrying quipu cords or spoken orders across the empire. During wartime, they became the veins of communication, running day and night. Positioned every few miles at relay stations, one chasqui would sprint until exhausted, then hand the message to the next. This system allowed news to travel with astonishing speed, sometimes covering hundreds of miles in just days. In battles and rebellions, such communication meant life or defeat, as armies could be mobilized or redirected almost instantly. To imagine young runners racing through thin mountain air, bearing the weight of empire on their shoulders, is to see how endurance itself became a weapon. The Incas proved that speed of word could equal strength of sword. Zulu impis used bullhorn formations. In the 19th century, the Zulu kingdom rose to power under the leadership of Shaka Zulu, whose military innovations reshaped African warfare. Central to his tactics was the bullhorn formation. Warriors advanced in three groups: the chest, which struck the enemy head on; the horns, which swept around to encircle; and the loins, held in reserve to exploit weaknesses. This formation turned battles into traps, surrounding foes with precision and ferocity. Zulu impis, disciplined regiments organized by age, executed these maneuvers with speed and cohesion. Their short stabbing spears, the ikulbar, replaced throwing weapons, emphasizing close combat. Against colonial forces and rival tribes, the bullhorn tactic often proved devastating. It revealed how strategic brilliance could magnify numbers and courage, transforming warriors into instruments of coordination. The image of horns closing around prey still echoes as a symbol of Zulu ingenuity, determination, and dominance. Maori warriors danced the haka before battle. For the Maori of New Zealand, battle was preceded by the haka, a fierce, rhythmic dance combining stomping, chanting, and gestures. Warriors painted and tattooed, faces contorted, performed the haka to display strength and unity, to intimidate enemies, and to summon courage from ancestors. The chants carried messages of defiance. The movements expressed power and readiness. To outsiders, the haka could be terrifying, a wall of men moving as one, eyes wide, tongues extended, voices thunderous. But for the Maori, it was more than intimidation. It was spiritual preparation, aligning body, spirit, and community for the fight ahead. The haka survives today in ceremony and sport, yet its roots remain in the battlefield. It reminds us that war is not only about weapons, but about presence, identity, and the will to face danger together with unbreakable resolve. War canoes of the Pacific could span over 100 feet. In the Pacific Islands, warfare took to the seas in vessels of extraordinary size and craftsmanship. Polynesian war canoes, some stretching over 100 feet long, carried hundreds of warriors across open ocean. Carved from massive trees or assembled from planks, decorated with carvings and feathers, they were both practical and ceremonial. Paddlers rowed in rhythm, their chants echoing across the waves, driving the vessel toward battle with incredible speed. These canoes allowed raids across islands, surprise landings, and dominance over vast waters. They were floating communities, blending artistry and warfare. Some were so large they rivaled small European ships in size, astonishing explorers who encountered them. For the Pacific peoples, The canoe was more than transport. It was identity, lifeline, and weapon. To see one glide across the horizon was to witness a nation on the move, power carried by the sea itself. Persian immortals were always kept at 10,000 strong. In the armies of ancient Persia, one elite unit stood apart, the immortals. This crack force of soldiers always numbered exactly 10,000. If a warrior fell in battle, another immediately replaced him, maintaining the appearance of an unchanging, eternal host. They were heavily armed with spears, bows, and shields, clad in armor that gleamed in the sun. To enemies, the sight of an endless wall of soldiers seemed otherworldly, as though they could never be diminished. The immortals served as both royal guard and shock troops, embodying the might of the Persian Empire. Their very name was psychological warfare, projecting inevitability and permanence. Whether legend exaggerated their invincibility or not, their reputation endured. To face the immortals was to confront the idea of infinity itself, a force that would never weaken, never falter, always renewed, always ready to march again. Greek hoplites polished armor to blind enemies. Hoplites, the citizen soldiers of ancient Greece, carried not only shields and spears but gleaming armor of bronze. Before battles, they polished helmets and breastplates until they shone like mirrors. On the battlefield, sunlight flashed from their ranks, dazzling opponents and creating the illusion of overwhelming brilliance. The sight of a wall of bronze advancing, spears bristling, could break enemy morale, even before contact. Armor was more than protection. It was spectacle, a psychological weapon that magnified presence. The polished surface also carried symbolic meaning, purity, readiness, and the reflection of divine favor. In phalanx formations, the collective shine made armies seem like living suns marching across fields. To fight against hoplites was not only to face men, but to face light itself, reflected and multiplied. Their gleam was both beauty and menace, a reminder that war often dazzled before it destroyed. War banners could be worth more than gold. Banners were more than fabric. They were treasures of loyalty and pride. In medieval Europe, capturing an enemy's banner was a triumph greater than taking treasure, for it symbolized the fall of their honor. Some banners were blessed by priests, believed to carry divine protection. Others bore heraldic symbols passed down for generations, embodying family or kingdom identity. To lose a banner in battle was considered shameful. To defend it was worth a warrior's life. In Japan, sashimono, small banners worn on samurai backs, marked individuals and units, transforming the battlefield into a forest of colors and symbols. Across cultures, banners united armies and proclaimed defiance. Their material value was nothing compared to their symbolic weight. They fluttered in wind and smoke, fragile yet powerful. A banner captured was a soul stolen, a story ended, or sometimes a new one begun in the hands of the victor. Trumpets once ordered cavalry to charge. Long before radios or even bugles, trumpets commanded armies into motion. In ancient Rome, cavalry moved at the sharp sound of the tuba, a long bronze trumpet. Its blast carried across fields, rallying horsemen into sudden charges. In medieval Europe, trumpeters rode alongside knights, their instruments gleaming as brightly as swords. Each call signaled specific maneuvers: advance, regroup, or unleash the full fury of a mounted assault. The sound itself was intoxicating, thrilling allies and terrifying foes who knew what followed. The thunder of hooves, the glitter of lances, and the crash of impact. Trumpeters were prized targets, for silence could sow confusion. Yet their music survived into peace, ceremonial echoes of the battlefield. To hear a trumpet blare was to feel history's heartbeat, a command that carried not only sound but destiny, turning air into power and music into motion. Soldiers once wore bright colors to stand out. Today's camouflage uniforms blend into forests and deserts, but for centuries, soldiers dressed in vivid colors. British redcoats marched in scarlet, French regiments wore blue and white, and other armies flaunted greens, yellows, and golds. The reasons were practical and symbolic. Bright colors allowed commanders to recognize units in the smoke of muskets, and they bolstered morale by creating unity and pride. Uniforms also intimidated enemies, transforming men into walls of color moving as one. The expense of dyes and cloth reflected wealth and power, turning soldiers into walking displays of national strength. Only with the advent of modern firearms and accurate rifles did armies abandon such displays, realizing that concealment was more valuable than spectacle. Yet the memory of bright uniforms lingers, reminders of an age when war was as much pageantry as peril, and battlefields blazed with banners and cloth as much as with fire. Camouflage uniforms became standard only recently. It may seem timeless, but the mottled camouflage we know today is a modern invention. For most of history, armies valued visibility, bright uniforms, glittering armor, shining banners. Concealment was rare. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, as rifles grew deadlier, armies realized that blending into terrain meant survival. Khaki, drab green, and earth tones spread first, replacing scarlet coats and blue tunics. During the World Wars, camouflage patterns developed further, designed to disrupt outlines in forests, deserts, and cities. Specialized units like snipers and scouts pioneered the use of ghillie suits, disguising themselves as part of the landscape. By the mid-20th century, camouflage had become the standard across the globe. What began as practicality evolved into art and science, with digital patterns and adaptive materials emerging today. Camouflage reflects a simple truth: to fight and endure, sometimes the best choice is to be unseen. The battlefield has always been a place of innovation. Though war is humanity's darkest endeavor, it has also been a relentless driver of innovation. From sharpened stone blades to bronze, iron, and steel, from bows to crossbows, muskets to machine guns, each leap forward reshaped societies. Armies spurred advancements in engineering, medicine, navigation, and communication. Roads, railways, radar, and the internet all bear roots in military needs. Even flight and space exploration grew from conflict's demands. Every era's battlefield has been both a site of destruction and a laboratory of invention, where necessity drove ideas faster than peace ever could. It is a paradox. The same energy that builds can also destroy, and often the line between the two is thin. Looking back, military history is not just about weapons and victories, but about the inventions that spilled beyond battlefields to shape the world we live in today. Tonight, we've wandered through the long echoes of military history. From obsidian blades glinting in firelight to satellites circling far above our world, we've traced how humanity has carried its conflicts across land, sea, sky, and even into space. We've stood beside Roman legions, locking their shields in unbreakable walls, and we've listened to the haunting sound of Highland pipes carrying soldiers into the unknown. We've watched war canoes glide across oceans and samurai loose arrows from horseback. Across centuries and cultures, battlefields have always been more than places of destruction. They were stages where courage, fear, ingenuity, and survival all played their roles. Yet in the quiet of reflection, those battlefields are silent now. The weapons have cooled. The banners rest in museums. What remains are lessons, stories, and the reminder that even in war, humanity's creativity and resilience endure. If you've enjoyed this long, gentle journey, I invite you to like and subscribe, or share a thought in the comments below. It helps other sleepy souls find their way here one by one. But for now, there is nothing left to do. Let the weight of history settle softly, like dust after a long march. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and allow yourself to drift into stillness. Sleep well, dream gently, and know that the echoes of the past will still be here when you wake. Good night.